The shriek of tortured metal was the first sermon this godforsaken rock had preached in 5 years. It tore through the perpetual twilight, a dissonant hymn that grated against the silence Kalen had cultivated like a rare, poisonous flower. He didn't just hear the crash. He felt it in the fillings of his teeth, a seismic violation of his self-imposed exile. From the rusted gantry of his watchtower, a repurposed ore processing facility that was now his fortress and his cage, he watched the fireball carve a path through the phosphorescent forest, a dying star plunging into a sea of spectral green. For a moment, a flicker of something ancient and unwelcome, curiosity, ignited in his gut. He crushed it under the heel of a worn combat boot. Trouble wasn't something you went looking for. On Xylos, it had a nasty habit of finding you anyway. He grabbed his pulse rifle, the cold, familiar weight a comfort against the sudden tremor in his hands. Salvage was salvage, and survival was a game of accumulating resources. But this felt different. This felt like an invitation. An hour later, he stood at the edge of the crater. The air, usually thick with the cloying scent of spore bloom and decay, now tasted of ozone and burnt circuits. In the center of the gouged earth lay the escape pod, not sleek and corporate, but sharp-angled and brutalist in its design, its hull the color of a fresh bruise. It was cracked open, not like an egg, but like a skull. The faint, rhythmic hiss of depressurizing atmosphere was the only sound. He moved with the ghost-like tread of a man who had spent a decade hunting things far more dangerous than scrap metal in jungles, far more lethal than this one. His rifle's targeting laser painted a crimson dot on the breach in the hull. And then he saw her. She wasn't lying in a heap of debris, a damsel awaiting rescue. She was crouched in the shadows of the cockpit, one hand clutching a deep gash in her side, the other holding a shard of jagged metal like a dagger. Her skin wasn't just green, it was a living jade, seeming to drink the faint bioluminescence of the surrounding flora, crisscrossed with faint, swirling patterns that pulsed with a soft inner light. A cascade of hair, the color of spun moonlight, fell over a face that was a symphony of lethal elegance. High cheekbones, a sharp jawline, and lips that looked like they could spit venom or whisper temptations with equal ease. But it was her eyes that held him captive. They were the color of molten gold, burning with a fierce, feral intelligence. There was no pain, no fear, only assessment. She was a predator, wounded but unbowed. "You take one more step," she rasped, her voice a low, melodic hum laced with static, "and I will decorate this wreckage with your entrails." Kalen stopped, his rifle steady. A slow, rusty smile cracked his weathered face. It had been a long, long time since anyone had threatened him with such style. "Lady," he drawled, his own voice a gravelly echo in the quiet crater. "My entrails are the least interesting thing about me. Now, are you going to bleed out in there, or are you going to accept the hospitality of the local misanthrope?" Her golden eyes narrowed, scanning him from head to toe. She saw the scars that mapped his face, the haunted look in his gray eyes that no amount of solitude could erase, the calm, deadly efficiency in his posture. "What's the price of this? Hospitality? You don't point sharp things at me. I don't leave you for the crater crawlers. They have terrible table manners." A tense moment stretched between them. The forest floor hissed and whispered around them. Finally, with a wince that she tried and failed to hide, she lowered the metal shard. The movement exposed the wound in her side more clearly. It was deep, angry, and weeping a substance that shimmered like oil on water. "Fine," she conceded, her voice tight. "But if you try anything, I will personally redefine your understanding of pain." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Sweetheart, you'll have to get in line." The journey back to his fortress was a silent, agonizing ordeal. He didn't offer to carry her. She wouldn't have accepted. She walked under her own power, one hand pressed to her side, her jaw set with a stubborn pride that he found both infuriating and admirable. He led her through concealed paths, past pressure plate traps and camouflaged sonic emitters, each step a testament to his paranoia. The heavy Durasteel door of his sanctuary hissed open, revealing a space that was part workshop, part barracks, and part tomb. Racks of dismantled weaponry lined one wall. A hydroponics bay glowed under purple lights in a corner, and a single Spartan cot was pushed against the far wall. The air was sterile, smelling of gun oil and recycled oxygen. He gestured towards the cot. "Get on it! I'll patch you up." She eyed the cot, then him. "I don't know your name." "Kaylin." "Lyra," she replied, the name sounding like a half-forgotten melody on her tongue. She moved to the cot and sat, her body finally betraying the exhaustion she'd held at bay. As Kaylin approached with a med kit, a strange sensation washed over him. The air grew heavy, thick with a charge like the moment before a lightning strike. A low hum vibrated at the base of his skull, and the scent of night-blooming jasmine and something else, something wild and electric, filled his senses. He faltered, a wave of dizziness cresting over him. He saw a flash of memory not his own, a sky of burning crimson, chrome spires crumbling into dust, a chorus of screams. He shook his head, blinking hard. What the hell was that? Lyra was staring at him, her golden eyes wide with something that might have been alarm. The faint patterns on her skin were glowing more brightly now. I don't know. Static discharge from the crash, maybe. Kaylin knew she was lying. He'd survived enough energy weapon discharges to know what they felt like. This was different. This was intimate. It was as if, for a fleeting second, her mind had brushed against his. He pushed the feeling aside, his training kicking in. Focus on the mission. The mission was the wound. "This is going to sting," he said gruffly, tearing away the tattered fabric of her strange, silvery garment. Her jade skin was cool to the touch, smooth as polished stone. As he began to clean the gash, the hum in his head intensified. The scent of jasmine grew stronger, intoxicating. He felt a sudden, primal surge of protectiveness, an irrational desire to shield her from 1,000 unseen threats. It was followed immediately by a wave of raw, possessive lust that was so potent it made his hands shake. He gritted his teeth, forcing the feelings down. "What are you?" he growled, his voice harsher than he intended. Lyra flinched, not from the sting of the antiseptic, but from the edge in his tone. "I told you. My name is Lyra. People have names. They don't usually come with their own atmospheric interference." He worked quickly, his movements precise and economical, applying a dermal regenerator and sealing the wound with synth flesh. The whole time he fought the invisible tide pulling at his senses, the strange, invasive energy that seemed to be radiating from her in waves. It was a battle he hadn't anticipated, a fight against his own mind. When he was done, he stepped back, putting distance between them. "You're safe here for now," he said, the words feeling like a lie. He didn't feel safe at all. He felt like he'd just brought a lit bomb into the only shelter he had. Lyra watched him, her golden eyes unreadable. The glow from her skin subsided. The hum in the air faded, but the echo of it remained. "Thank you, Kaylin," she said, her voice soft, disarming. He just grunted in response, turning away to clean his tools. He couldn't look at her. He couldn't trust the things she made him feel. In the sterile confines of his isolated world, Lyra was a variable he couldn't calculate, a contamination he had willingly invited inside. And as the planet's twin moons cast long, distorted shadows through the reinforced viewport, Kaylin had the sinking feeling that his 5 years of peace, however hollow, had just come to a violent and spectacular end. The next few cycles were a cold war fought in the trenches of silence and suspicion. Lyra healed with an unnatural speed, the angry gash in her side fading to a thin silver scar that seemed to shimmer against her jade skin. She moved around his sanctuary with a restless grace, a caged panther studying the dimensions of its new prison. She asked few questions, instead observing everything, from the way he meticulously maintained his weapons to the faded insignia on the shoulder of his old fatigues, a ghost of a life he'd tried to bury. Kaylin, in turn, watched her. He tried to remain detached, to see her as a problem to be managed, but it was impossible. The psychic static around her was a constant presence, a low thrum against his mental shields. At times, it was almost pleasant, a soft warmth that eased the gnawing loneliness he refused to acknowledge. At other times, it was a razor-sharp intrusion. He'd be calibrating a rifle sight and suddenly be hit with a wave of profound sorrow that was not his own. Or he'd be tending his hydroponics and be blindsided by a flash of defiant rage so intense it made him see red. She was a psychic storm in a deceptively beautiful package, and his control was fraying. "You were a soldier," she stated one evening, not a question. They were sharing a meal of nutrient paste, the silence between them thick enough to be a third presence at the table. He didn't look up. "A long time ago." "7th Orbital Shock Division," she continued, her golden eyes fixed on him. "They were legendary, brutal, effective, disbanded after the Cygnus campaign. Rumor was they were sent on a suicide mission and wiped out to the last man." Kalen's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. His knuckles were white where he gripped it. "You know a lot for a woman with amnesia." A faint, challenging smile touched her lips. "My memory is selective. It comes and goes. Tell me, Kalen of the 7th, what does a man who survived the unsurvivable do when the war is over? He finds the quietest, most forgotten corner of the galaxy and prays no one ever finds him," he bit out, the words tasting like ash. "And does it work? Do the ghosts leave you alone?" Her question was a scalpel, sliding between his ribs. The static in the air sharpened. He felt a phantom pain in his shoulder, where shrapnel had once torn through him. He saw the faces of his fallen comrades, their eyes accusing him. He slammed his fork down, the clatter echoing in the tense quiet. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "I want to know who I'm sharing a cage with," she shot back, her gaze unwavering. "You bring me here, patch me up, feed me, but you look at me like I'm a specter at a feast. You flinch when I get too close. What are you so afraid of?" "I'm not afraid of you." "No," she said, rising from her chair. She moved toward him, and with every step she took, the pressure in his head mounted. The scent of jasmine and lightning intensified, coiling in his lungs. "Then what is it? This thing between us, this energy. You feel it too, don't you?" She stopped just before him, so close he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. The patterns on her body were glowing softly, a mesmerizing, hypnotic dance of light. He could see the pulse beating in the delicate arch of her throat. Every instinct screamed at him to back away, to re-establish the distance that kept him sane. But he was rooted to the spot, caught in the gravity of her. "It's like, you're shouting, but there's no sound," he managed to say, his throat tight. "It's in my head." Her expression softened, a flicker of vulnerability in those golden depths. "For me, it's like an echo. I feel your loneliness, your pain. It's like a wound that never healed." She lifted a hand, her fingers hesitating just inches from his face. "I don't know how to stop it." Before he could respond, a shrill alarm blared through the compound. Red lights flashed, casting the room in a bloody, pulsating glow. On a monitor, a proximity alert showed 3 ships descending through the upper atmosphere. They were sleek, black, and utterly silent. Not military, not pirates, something else. "They're here," Lyra whispered, and for the first time, Kalen heard genuine fear in her voice. "Who's here?" he snapped, already moving, grabbing his pulse rifle from its rack and slinging a bandolier of charge packs across his chest. "The Silent Order," she said, her eyes locked on the descending ships. "Zealots, hunters, they believe what I am is a corruption, a plague to be purged." Kalen glanced from the monitor back to her, the pieces clicking into place with grim certainty. "And what are you, Lyra?" The glow from her skin was brilliant now, bathing her in an ethereal, jade-colored light. "I am a chrysalis," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "And my metamorphosis is about to begin." The first explosion rocked the foundation of the fortress. It wasn't a dumb projectile. It was a surgical strike, a focused energy lance that vaporized a section of the outer wall, showering the interior with molten rock. Kalen shoved Lyra behind a reinforced bulkhead. "Stay here! The inner defenses are automated!" He raced to a command console, his fingers flying across the keypad. Outside, hidden turrets rose from the earth, spitting streams of plasma at the black-clad figures rappelling from the silent ships. They moved with a chilling, insect-like grace, their forms blurring with speed. Their armor seemed to absorb the plasma bolts, dissipating the energy with barely a shimmer. "They're shielded," Kalen yelled over the din of battle. "Personal energy cloaks!" A second lance hit, closer this time, blowing the main door off its hinges. 3 figures flowed through the breach like shadows. They wore no insignia, their faces hidden behind reflective obsidian masks. In their hands, they carried blades that hummed with a dark, negative energy. Kalen opened fire, his pulse rifle stitching a line of brilliant blue bolts across the room. Two of the figures sidestepped the volley with impossible speed. The third brought its blade up, and the energy bolts simply vanished, absorbed into the weapon's disruptive field. "We have to get to the tunnels," Kalen shouted, grabbing Lyra's arm. The psychic pressure in the room was suffocating. It wasn't just coming from Lyra anymore. It was a three-way battle of wills. The hunters projected an aura of cold, fanatical certainty, a psychic dead zone that sought to smother her power. Lyra's own energy was flaring wildly, a desperate, uncontrolled torrent of fear and defiance. The combination was agonizing, giving Kalen a migraine that felt like his skull was trying to tear itself apart. One of the hunters lunged, its dark blade carving a silent arc through the air. Kalen met the attack with the butt of his rifle, the impact jarring his bones. He was strong, but the hunter was faster, its movements unnervingly fluid. He saw his opening, a gap in its defense, and drove his combat knife toward its throat. The blade scraped uselessly against the armor. The hunter's masked face tilted. From a speaker in the mask, a synthesized voice, devoid of all emotion, spoke a single word. "Heretic!" It drove its blade down. Suddenly, a wave of force, visible as a ripple in the air, slammed into the hunter, throwing it back across the room where it crashed into the far wall with a sickening crunch. Kalen stared. Lyra stood with her hand outstretched, her eyes blazing with golden fire. The patterns on her skin were a blinding jade inferno. She hadn't just pushed the hunter, she had commanded the space around it to violently reject it. Another hunter appeared behind her, blade raised for a killing blow. "Lyra, look out!" Kalen yelled, but it was too late. He wouldn't reach her in time. At the last second, she spun, not with the speed of a warrior, but with the impossible grace of a dancer. Her hand shot out and caught the hunter's wrist. The hunter froze, its body locked in place. "Who sent you?" Lyra demanded, her voice resonating with an unearthly power that made the walls vibrate. The hunter remained silent. "Tell me!" she commanded, and Kalen felt the psychic pressure spike. He felt Lyra's will, a tangible thing forcing its way past the hunter's defenses. He saw a flash in his own mind, a vision of a throne room, cold and austere, made of black volcanic glass. A woman sat on the throne, her face a mask of regal severity, her eyes the same molten gold as Lyra's, but frozen with a chilling conviction. The hunter convulsed, and the synthesized voice rasped. "For the purity of the Empyrean, by the will of the matriarch." Serafina. Lyra recoiled as if struck, her concentration breaking. "No, it can't be." The hunter took advantage of the lapse, breaking free and slashing its blade across her arm. Lyra cried out, a sound of both pain and betrayal. The scent of ozone and her strange, shimmering blood filled the air. Kalen's rage boiled over. He charged the hunter, tackling it to the ground. Forgetting his knife, he rained blows against its masked face with his bare fists, the impacts doing more damage to his own knuckles than to the helmet. Years of suppressed fury, from the war, from his exile, from the ghosts that haunted him, found their release in that single, desperate assault. The last hunter, the leader, stood observing the chaos. It raised its hand and the two others disengaged, retreating to its side. "The chrysalis is unstable," the leader's synthesized voice announced, its tone flat and analytical. "The maturation is premature. We will withdraw and prepare the purifier. The planet will be sterilized to prevent the contagion from spreading." It turned its obsidian mask toward Kalen. "As for the heretic who harbored her, you have condemned this world to oblivion." With that, the three figures blurred, vanishing back into the phosphorescent gloom of the forest. Silence descended, broken only by the crackle of fires and the ragged sound of Kalen and Lyra's breathing. He scrambled over to her, grabbing her wounded arm. The cut was deep. "Serafina," she whispered, her eyes wide with shock. "My sister. She's the matriarch of the Order." Kalen looked from her devastated face to the gaping hole in his sanctuary, the smoldering ruins of his 5 years of solitude. Oblivion, the word echoed in the sudden terrifying silence. He had spent years running from a war he couldn't win, only to find himself on the front lines of a new one. And this time, the enemy wasn't just an army. It was a belief, a fanaticism that would burn a world to kill one woman. "We need to go," he said, his voice grim. "They'll be back. And they're not going to knock next time?" They fled into the spectral forest, leaving the burning husk of Kalen's fortress behind. The ground was a spongy carpet of glowing moss, and the trees were twisted, skeletal things that dripped a viscous, phosphorescent sap. The air was thick with the hum of unseen insects and the psychic residue of Lyra's chaotic, flaring power. She was a walking storm, and Kalen was the lightning rod. Every few minutes, a wave of her uncontrolled emotions would wash over him. He felt the sharp, stabbing pain of her betrayal, a grief so profound it made his own losses feel trivial. Then came the volcanic rage, a desire for vengeance that was primal and terrifying. Her psychic emissions were no longer just whispers and echoes. They were screams, lashing out at the world around them. The flora recoiled as they passed, the glowing moss dimming, the dripping sap turning black and viscous. She was poisoning the very air they breathed. "You have to get it under control," Kalen gritted out, stumbling over a gnarled root. The back of his skull throbbed with the constant psychic assault. "I can't think straight. I can't keep us safe if my head is full of you." Lyra stopped, leaning against a tree, her breathing ragged. Her jade skin was slick with sweat, and the glowing patterns were flickering erratically, like a faulty neon sign. "You think I'm doing this on purpose?" she snapped, her voice cracking. "My entire life has been a lie. The person I trust most in the universe, my own sister, wants to eradicate me. She's leading a cult of genocidal maniacs, and they're going to burn this entire planet to ash just to kill me. Forgive me if I'm a little emotional." "This is more than emotion," he countered, his soldier's pragmatism fighting through the haze of psychic noise. "It's a weapon and you're firing it blindly. You're a danger to everything around you, including me." Her golden eyes, shimmering with unshed tears, flashed with anger. "Then leave, go. Find another rock to hide under." "It's what you're good at, isn't it? Running?" Her words hit their mark, a poison-tipped dart finding the weakest point in his armor. He saw again the faces of his squad, left behind on Cygnus. He felt the crushing weight of his survivor's guilt. Her power seized on the memory, amplifying it, twisting it. The phosphorescent trees around him morphed into the burning ruins of a cityscape. The hum of the forest became the screams of the dying. He was back there in the heart of the massacre, the air thick with smoke and the smell of cooked flesh. He dropped to one knee, clutching his head, his rifle clattering to the ground. "Stop it!" he gasped, the words swallowed by the phantom explosions echoing in his mind. Lyra stared at him, her anger instantly replaced by horror as she realized what was happening. She saw the images in his head, felt the raw, unhealed trauma her power had just ripped open. "Kalen, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." She reached for him, but he flinched away. "Don't touch me!" he snarled, crawling backward, his eyes wild. "Just stay away from me." Seeing his agony, a raw, desperate instinct took over her. She fought against the tidal wave of her own emotions, seeking a single point of focus, an anchor. She found it in the memory of his touch when he had tended her wound, the rough, calloused feel of his hands, the surprising gentleness, the gruff concentration on his face. She clung to that sensation, that moment of connection, using it to dam the flood of her chaotic power. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to pull the energy back in, to quiet the psychic storm. The hallucinations faded. The sounds of the burning city were replaced once more by the alien hum of the forest. Kalen was left breathing heavily, the phantom smells of smoke and death still clinging to his senses. He looked up at her. She was trembling with the effort of control, her face pale. The overwhelming psychic pressure had receded, leaving behind only a faint, weary thrum. "How did you do that?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I focused," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "On you, on the moment you helped me." It was quiet. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. They had just shared something more intimate than a touch, more revealing than a confession. She had been inside his head, and he had been a victim of her power. The dynamic between them had shifted, becoming something more complex, more dangerous, and more inextricably linked. He rose to his feet, his legs unsteady. He picked up his rifle, the weight of it a familiar reality in a world that had just come unglued. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as a piece of salvage, not as a psychic bomb, but as a person who was just as lost and terrified as he was. "This purifier," he said, his voice regaining its steady, grim tone. "If they're planning to sterilize the planet, they'll need to target the planetary core. There's only one place on Xylos with a deep-bore drill powerful enough to do that. The old geothermal plant at Kenjira." Lyra straightened up, a flicker of her old fire returning to her eyes. "How far?" 2 days' march, through the worst hunting ground on this rock." He shouldered his rifle and looked out into the glowing, predatory forest. A cynical, joyless smile touched his lips. At least it won't be boring. Their journey to Kenjira was a descent into a phosphorescent hell. They moved through canyons carved by ancient rivers of acid, where the rock itself seemed to breathe a corrosive vapor. They scaled cliffs of obsidian glass, sharp enough to flay skin from bone. The predators here were unlike anything Kaelin had ever encountered. Chitinous, multi-limbed things that hunted by sensing psychic energy, drawn to the faint, controlled thrum that Lyra now constantly emitted. Kaelin became the hunter again. He moved with a lethal grace, his years of exile honing his instincts to a razor's edge. He taught Lyra how to move silently, how to read the alien landscape, how to kill without hesitation. In turn, she became his early warning system. She could feel the creatures long before they appeared, a cold, hungry static at the edge of her senses. They developed a strange, symbiotic rhythm, a silent language of glances and gestures. He was the body, the physical force, and she was the mind, the sentinel. But the true battle was the one they fought every night when they made camp in the shelter of a cave or beneath an overhang of glowing rock. The darkness brought with it a different kind of predator, their own memories. To maintain her control, Lyra had to remain anchored, and her anchor was Kaelin. She would reach out to him, not with the uncontrolled force of before, but with a tentative, delicate touch, her mind brushing against his. She would sift through his memories, looking for moments of calm, of focus. She experienced the grueling discipline of his shock trooper training, the quiet camaraderie of his unit before the final disastrous mission. And Kaelin, in turn, felt her presence in his mind not as an intrusion, but as a strange comfort. He allowed her in, and in doing so, he began to see fragments of her own past, unfiltered by her fear or anger. He saw a young girl with golden eyes, dwarfed by the cold, cavernous halls of a palace made of black glass. He saw a sister, Seraphina, older and sterner, training her in the control of their shared abilities, her lessons laced with warnings about the corrupting nature of emotion. He saw a family that feared her empathy, that saw her connection to others as a weakness, a flaw in a lineage of ruthless matriarchs. One night, huddled by a low-burning fire that gave off more smoke than heat, the connection deepened. She was sifting through his mind when she stumbled upon a memory he kept buried deeper than any other. A woman's face, laughing. Her hair was the color of fire, her eyes a brilliant, defiant blue. They were lying in a field of what looked like tall, purple grass, under a sky with 3 suns. He felt a phantom touch on his cheek, smelled a forgotten perfume. Lyra recoiled, pulling her consciousness back abruptly. The sudden disconnect left them both breathless. "Who was she?" Lyra whispered into the darkness. Kaelin was silent for a long time, staring into the flickering embers. "Her name was Anya," he said finally, his voice thick with unshed grief. "She was my pilot. My friend, my everything. She died on Cygnus. I was giving the orders that got her killed." He had never spoken those words aloud. Saying them felt like swallowing broken glass. Lyra felt a wave of his guilt, so powerful and so old it had become a part of him, woven into his very soul. Without thinking, she moved closer, her shoulder brushing against his. She didn't offer empty words of comfort. She simply shared the weight of his sorrow, her own sense of betrayal at the hands of her sister, creating a strange, tragic harmony with his grief. He didn't pull away. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to share the burden of his ghosts. "Your sister," he said, changing the subject, needing to escape the gravity of his own past. "She fears you. But it's more than that. She's jealous." Lyra looked at him, surprised. "Jealous? She's the perfect heir, strong, controlled, ruthless, everything my family values. I was the disappointment. She's jealous of your empathy, Kaylin clarified. She was taught that emotion is a corruption, a weakness to be purged. But you can use it. You connect with people. It's a power she doesn't understand and can't control, so she branded it a plague. It's easier to destroy something you fear than to admit you are flawed. His words resonated with a profound truth. She saw her entire life in a new, harsher light. Her sister's cruelty hadn't been born of strength, but of fear. Deep in the night, as they sat in the shared silence of their respective griefs, she reached out and took his hand. Her skin was warm, the faint jade light pulsing in a slow, steady rhythm. His hand was rough, calloused, scarred. He laced his fingers through hers. It wasn't a gesture of passion, but of something deeper, an acknowledgement, a pact. Two broken soldiers, from two different wars, finding a moment of ceasefire in each other's company. They were no longer just a man and a woman. They were Kaylin and Lyra, and they were all that stood between a world and its annihilation. The Kinjira geothermal plant was a monument to corporate avarice, a colossal skeletal structure of rust and ruin stabbed into the planet's crust. A miasma of sulfur and steam hung over it, and the ground vibrated with the thrum of ancient, decaying machinery. As they watched from a ridge, they saw the Silent Order's ships landed on the main platform. Black-clad figures moved with purpose, setting up equipment around the primary drill head. At its center was a device that hummed with a sickly purple light, the Purifier. "We're out of time," Kaylin said, checking the charge on his rifle. "They're prepping the firing sequence. Once that drill is activated, it will deliver the payload directly to the core. The planet will fracture from the inside out." "How many of them are there?" Lyra asked, her eyes scanning the platform. "Too many for a frontal assault," he answered grimly. "We need a distraction. Something big." He looked at her, and she saw the plan forming in his eyes. A reckless, desperate soldier's plan. "No," she said immediately. "Absolutely not. You want me to be a diversion? To light myself up like a beacon and draw them all to me while you do what? Play the hero?" "It's the only way," he insisted, his voice low and urgent. "They're here for you. You are the one thing they'll all focus on. While they're distracted, I can get to the Purifier and overload it. It's our only shot. And what happens to me when your plan goes sideways?" she demanded, her golden eyes flashing. "What happens when they corner me and you're a charred smear on the platform?" "It won't," he said with more confidence than he felt. He reached out, his hand resting on her arm. His touch was grounding. "I'm not leaving you behind. Not this time." The last three words hung in the air between them, an unspoken reference to Anya, to Cygnus, to the ghosts he was finally ready to face. He was no longer just running from his past. He was trying to redeem it. Lyra searched his face, seeing the grim determination there, the acceptance of the cost. She saw the man who had survived the unsurvivable, and she trusted him. She nodded once. "Don't make me regret this, Kaylin." He gave her a tight, brief smile. "Just try to stay alive." With that, he slipped away, a ghost in the sulphurous mist, circling around the perimeter to find a way in. Lyra took a deep breath, closing her eyes. She reached for her power not with fear or rage, but with a cold, focused intent. She remembered the faces of the families she had seen in her visions of this planet's possible future, the innocent lives her sister was willing to sacrifice. She let that protective instinct fuel her. She opened her eyes, and they were twin suns. A wave of pure, unadulterated psychic power erupted from her, a silent, concussive blast that washed over the entire facility. Down on the platform, the soldiers of the Silent Order staggered. Their helmet visors crackled with static. The very air around her began to shimmer, and the ground at her feet cracked. She rose into the air, levitated by the sheer force of her own will, her hair a swirling corona of silver, her skin a blinding beacon of jade light. She had become the storm. The hunt was on. The moment Lyra's power erupted, chaos consumed the platform. Every member of the Order turned as one, their obsidian masks facing the incandescent figure now hanging in the sky. Kaylin used the distraction to his advantage, scaling a rusted pipeline and dropping into the shadowy underbelly of the facility. He moved through a maze of pipes and machinery, the groans of the dying plant covering his footsteps. Above, the battle raged. Lyra was a force of nature. She didn't fight like a soldier. She fought like a goddess. She ripped sheets of metal from the walls and hurled them like discus. She sent arcs of raw kinetic energy crashing into squads of hunters, sending them flying. But they were relentless. They absorbed her attacks, their dark blades deflecting her power, and they kept advancing, their cold, fanatical purpose a shield against her psychic onslaught. Kaelin reached the base of the main drill. The purifier was 20 meters above him, guarded by a quartet of elite hunters. And standing before it, her back to him, was a woman in ornate black armor, her silver hair braided in a severe coronet. Seraphina. She hadn't joined the fray, instead observing her sister's desperate battle with a cold detachment. Kaelin knew he had one chance. He set the explosive charge he'd salvaged from his fortress, priming it for a remote detonation. He just needed to get it onto the purifier's energy core. He broke from cover, his rifle spitting plasma. The elite guards reacted instantly, two of them raising their energy-dampening blades, the other two charging him. He dove behind a control console as their blades sliced through the space where he'd been. The fight was a brutal, close-quarters affair. He was outmatched, but he was more experienced, more desperate. He used the environment, kicking up clouds of metallic dust to obscure their sensors, using the steam vents as cover. He dispatched one with a knife to an unarmored joint at the neck. The second he disabled by jamming the muzzle of his rifle into its knee actuator, crippling it, then finishing it with a point-blank shot to its masked face. But the other two were on him, their blades pinning him. He was trapped. Above, Lyra was beginning to tire. Her attacks were becoming less focused. Her power, while immense, was finite. She was swarmed, dozens of black-clad figures closing in, their blades humming. Seraphina watched, her expression unreadable. "Your empathy has made you weak, sister," she murmured to herself, raising a hand to give the signal for the final killing blow. Suddenly, the two guards pinning Kaelin were ripped from him, thrown aside by an unseen force. Lyra, bleeding from a dozen cuts, her breath coming in ragged gasps, had divided her attention, saving him at the cost of her own defense. "Go!" she screamed, the word a psychic command that echoed in his skull as the horde of hunters finally overwhelmed her, dragging her down. Kaelin didn't hesitate. He sprinted for the purifier, the primed charge in his hand. He leapt onto its casing, slapped the charge onto the glowing power core, and rolled off the other side just as Seraphina turned, her golden eyes, so like her sister's, widening in shock. "For the seventh," Kaelin growled and hit the detonator. The explosion wasn't large, but it was precise. It cracked the purifier's containment field. Purple energy, raw and unstable, poured out of the device, tearing it apart from the inside. The chain reaction ripped through the drill head, then down into the geothermal plant itself. Seraphina screamed as the platform buckled beneath her. A chasm opened up, swallowing the drill, the purifier, and most of her hunters. Kaelin clung to a swaying gantry as the world tore itself apart around him. He saw Lyra, surrounded by the few remaining hunters, on a section of the platform that was tilting into the abyss. He fought his way across the unstable structure, his rifle lost to the chaos. He reached her side, pulling her up. He faced down the last 5 hunters, armed only with his combat knife and his fists. Then something changed. Lyra, kneeling but not broken, placed her hand on the metal deck. She closed her eyes, and this time the power that flowed from her was different. It wasn't a wave of force. It was a wave of pure, undiluted emotion. It wasn't her rage or her fear. It was Kaelin's. The hunters froze. Their fanatical certainty was shattered by the sudden, overwhelming flood of a stranger's guilt. They felt the crushing weight of his failures on Cygnus, the agony of his loss, the bitterness of his exile. Their cold, logical faith was no match for the raw, messy, beautiful chaos of a human soul laid bare. They staggered back, clutching their heads, their internal shields overwhelmed. One of them dropped its blade and tore at its own mask, its mind broken by the sudden, unwanted empathy. Seraphina, who had managed to pull herself from the edge of the chasm, stared in horror. "What have you done?" she shrieked. "I have shown them the truth," Lyra said, her voice quiet but resonant. "That strength without compassion is just brutality." The ground gave one final violent shudder. The section of the platform they were on broke free, sliding into the fiery pit below. Kalen grabbed Lyra, wrapping his arms around her as they fell into darkness and fire. The last thing he saw was Seraphina's face, a mask of pure, uncomprehending hatred as she was consumed by the collapsing plant. Then nothing. Consciousness returned slowly, a painful ascent from a deep, dark ocean. Kalen's first sensation was the feeling of something soft beneath him. Not rock, not metal, moss. He opened his eyes. He was lying in a crater, miles from Kenjira, the ruins of which were a pillar of smoke on the horizon. Lyra was curled beside him, her jade skin pale, her breathing shallow, but she was alive. Around them, a perfect circle of ground 100 meters wide had been cushioned by a thick, impossibly soft carpet of the glowing moss he'd seen in the forest. She had saved them, her final, desperate act of power a shield to cushion their fall. He sat up, his body a symphony of pain. Every muscle screamed in protest. He looked down at Lyra, sleeping the sleep of the utterly exhausted. Her storm was finally quiet. He brushed a strand of silver hair from her face. In her sleep, she looked younger, the weight of her destiny momentarily lifted. He had come to this world seeking silence, an escape from connection, from feeling. And this woman had crashed into his life, a maelstrom of both, and dragged him back into the fight. He thought he was saving her, but in the end, they had saved each other. He looked up at the alien sky, at the twin moons that had been his only companions for 5 years. They no longer looked distant and cold. For the first time, he didn't feel alone. Their war wasn't over. Seraphina's hatred had been the product of an entire culture, an empire built on the suppression of emotion. There were others. There would always be others, but now they would face them together. Lyra stirred, her golden eyes fluttering open. She saw him watching her, and a slow, weary smile touched her lips. "Did we win?" she whispered. Kalen returned the smile, a genuine expression that felt foreign and wonderful on his face. "We survived," he said. "That's a start." He offered her his hand, and she took it, her fingers lacing through his. Together, they rose to their feet, two castaways on a broken world, and faced the smoke-stained horizon of their new beginning. What came next was a blur of survival, then strategy. Days turned into weeks. Lyra's full strength returned, and with it, a newfound control. The crucible of Kenjira had forged her power into a precise instrument. She could reach out now, not just with raw emotion, but with subtle influence, planting suggestions, soothing fears, inspiring loyalty. They found a communications relay in the ruins of an old settlement, and, using her burgeoning abilities, Lyra sent a message to her homeworld. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a declaration. She exposed the Silent Order as a cult created and fostered by the ruling class, her own family, to eliminate threats to their rigid, emotionless control. She spoke of her sister's treachery and the attempted genocide on Xylos. She didn't declare herself a queen or a conqueror. She offered a new way, a leadership of empathy in a galaxy ruled by fear. The message sent ripples through the Empyrean Empire. Factions loyal to the old ways, led by the remnants of her family, declared her a traitor. But others, those who had chafed under the sterile, oppressive rule of the matriarchs, saw a spark of hope. A civil war began, not with armies and fleets, but with whispers and ideology. Kalen, the grizzled soldier who wanted only solitude, found himself a general in a war of hearts and minds. He became the head of her nascent intelligence network, her chief strategist, her bodyguard, her anchor. He taught her followers how to fight, how to resist, how to survive. He was the iron fist to her compassionate voice. Months later, they stood on the bridge of a stolen Imperial cruiser looking at the star map. A dozen systems had declared their allegiance to her. 100 more were wavering. They had gone from being fugitives to the leaders of a revolution. That evening, she found him on the observation deck, staring at the swirling nebula outside the viewport. He was cleaning his new pulse rifle, the motions automatic, calming. "A credit for your thoughts, General," she said softly, coming to stand beside him. Her presence was a quiet warmth now, a constant, comforting hum at the edge of his senses. He stopped his work, looking at their reflection in the star-dusted glass. "I was just thinking," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This is a long way from a quiet moon at the ass end of the galaxy. Do you miss it? She asked, her golden eyes searching his. The silence? The solitude. He considered it for a moment, then shook his head. The silence was just noise I had gotten used to. This is the first time I felt peace in a decade. He turned to face her, setting the rifle aside. He took her hand. I spent so long trying to keep the world out. I didn't realize I was just locking myself in. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. They stood in comfortable silence, watching galaxies drift by. Their journey had been forged in fire and blood, but it had led them here, to this quiet moment of shared purpose. Kaylin, she said, her voice a murmur against his chest. The revolution isn't the only thing that's growing. She took his free hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. For a moment, he didn't understand. Then, through their connection, he felt it, a tiny, faint spark of life. A new consciousness, impossibly small but humming with a familiar, powerful energy. It was a fusion of them both. His eyes widened, and he looked from her stomach to her face. She was smiling, a radiant, brilliant expression of love and hope, tinged with a healthy dose of fear for the future. He felt a joy so fierce and so pure it nearly brought him to his knees. He, Kaylin, the broken soldier, the lonely exile, was going to be a father. He swept her into his arms, burying his face in her silver hair, his laughter echoing through the observation deck. He held her tight, this impossible, wonderful woman who had crashed into his world and rebuilt it from the ashes. Their child would be born into a galaxy at war, a symbol of a new way and a target for the old one. Their greatest adventure, their most dangerous battle, was just beginning. But as he held her, feeling the steady beat of her heart and the faint, miraculous pulse of the new life they had created, he knew they would face it together. And for the first time, he was not afraid of the future. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you enjoyed this story and want to explore more worlds with us, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an adventure. Let us know in the comments what you think the future holds for Kaylin, Lyra, and their growing family. Until next time, stay brave and keep exploring.